Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. A few weeks ago I asked my Instagram followers what I should paint for my first tutorial. The options were either a mountain scene or a beach scene and the majority voted mountain. So here it is. This is what I've been working on and today I want to show you how I did it so you can follow along or you can sit back and watch me paint. That's fine as well. In this tutorial I want to introduce the palette knife to you. If you're not sure what a palette knife is, I'll explain it. I'll show you the technique I use to create my mountains. And also, pretty soon, I'm going to list all the types of brushes and acrylic colors I use. I will also list them in the description and also the reference photo that I'm using for this tutorial. And so before we get started, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. All right, and let's get started.
Alright, and the first thing I like to do is map out where everything is going to go. And to do this, I just simply draw lines. And at this point, it doesn't matter which brush you use. I'm just going to use a flat brush. But I'm going to use raw Sienna paint. And I'm going to draw lines to map out my mountain and trees and the ground. So I'm going to draw a line right here. To represent the mountains will go there. And draw another line because the trees will go in the middle. Finally coming up to the front, I'm going to paint a slanted line. Because if you look at the reference picture, it looks like it's going like uphill. Okay, and there we go. So I've mapped out everything. So now the first thing I would like to work on are the mountains. And go ahead and give your brush a rinse and dry it off. And for the mountain, I will use a flat brush. And the reason why is because when you look at a mountain, it's not curvy. There are jagged edges, rugged edges, or whatnot. And so a flat brush will help give that effect for my mountains. And the colors I'm going to use are black, white, and phthalo blue. So I already have some mixed right here, and you can see it's like a bluish grayish type color. But if you do not have a flat brush, it's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and paint in the mountain. At this initial stage, if you feel like your mountain is too curvy or if it's too much like a perfect triangle shape, it's fine, because we're going to go over this mountain with several layers and you'll have other opportunities to add dimension and more like rough edges to the mountains. Alright, so I got that, and now I'm going to use the rest of the color to paint the mountain. And this is the part where you could go over the line that you just painted in to add more edges to your mountain. If at any point you feel that your mountain does not look like mine, don't beat yourself up. Each person has their own artistic style, and so I'm aware that my picture is not going to look exactly like the reference picture. So, don't beat yourself up. Just go with the flow, just roll with it. I am running out of color, so I'm going to mix the three colors: permanent black, titanium white, and phthalo blue. All right, so that looks good. That's the first layer of our mountain, and so now we're going to work on the ground. You will need yellow ochre and raw sienna, and at this point I'm still using my flat brush. So you're going to mix those colors together and start painting the ground. Oops, looks like my gray got mixed in the color, but it's okay. Let me get started. I'm going to paint the ground, and this is only the first layer. We're going to revisit this to add a second layer. And you'll keep painting until you feel satisfied with how it looks. Okay, so go ahead and give your brush a rinse, and we're going to let this dry so we can move on to the next step. Alright, our painting is dry, so now we're going to work on the sky. The colors I'm going to use are Cerulean Blue, Phthalo Blue, and Titanium White. And I've switched to a Filbert brush to paint the sky as well. I love how the Filbert brush has the brush strokes that looks like clouds in the sky. I want to make this a little lighter, so I'm adding more titanium white. And if you see that the blue is starting to get onto the mountain, it's okay, because like I said earlier, we're going to go add more layers to the mountain anyway. So we'll be able to fix like the white lines and the blue that's on the mountains. And usually the sky would be the first thing I paint, but I was so excited to show you guys how to paint the mountain, it just slipped my mind, but we'll work with it. Okay, so we painted our sky. It looks beautiful. Give your brush a rinse. And so we're going to add another layer to the ground. So if you still have that mixture on your palette, the yellow ochre and raw sienna, go ahead and paint a second layer. If the acrylic paint has dried out, just spritz a little bit of water to loosen up the paint. Alright, give your brush a rinse and dry off your brush. Alright, so we're going to revisit the mountains. And so this time we're going to go over a second layer. I want to cover up the white lines that's showing around the mountains when we painted our sky. So we're going to use the same mixture, permanent black, titanium white, and phthalo blue. And I've run out of titanium white on my palette, so I'm adding more. As you can see, you're going to use a lot of white in your paintings. And I'm using my flat brush to do this. Alright, and now I'm adding in another layer to the mountains. I'm striving to cover up the white lines, all while adding rugged edges to the mountain. Okay, so we're going to let our mountain dry, and now we're going to work on the ground, but this time we're going to add grass. So if you still have the yellow ochre and raw sienna mix on your palette, you're just going to simply add titanium white to make it lighter. So now I'm going to use a tiny filbert brush for the grass. Alright, and I'm adding in the titanium white. I want to make sure it's lighter than the ground so it could really stand out. Okay, so I have my tiny filbert brush, and I'm not going to load too much paint onto the brush, and I'm just going to do rapid brush strokes for the grass. And you'll cover the entire ground with the grass. Okay, so that looks good. So far, so good. Just adding in more grass. Okay, so that looks wonderful. So far, so good. Now the next thing we're going to work on, we're going to visit the mountains again. So you're going to mix the same three colors, permanent black, titanium white, and phthalo blue. But this time we're going to use the palette knife. So if your color has dried out, just spread some water on it to loosen up the paint, or just mix the three colors again on your palette. I'm just adding a little bit more titanium white so it's a little bit lighter, because this time you want your gray to be a little lighter than what's currently on your canvas or mixed media paper. Alright, give your brush a rinse. And this is a palette knife. A palette knife is used to apply and mix colors. Artists like Bob Ross, they normally use it to create their mountains, but you can also paint like flowers or anything else using a palette knife instead of a paintbrush. And so this is what we're going to use to add texture to our mountain. So the color mixture that you just did, you're just going to scoop up just a little bit on your palette knife, not too much. If you feel like you get too much on your knife, just gently tap the excess onto your palette. And so when you're using a palette knife, you're going to gently just glide it across your canvas. So you can pick any spot where you want to start and just gently glide it across. And be careful not to stab or jab into your canvas because you're going to rip a hole in it, tear it up. So you just continue the process, get more paint onto your palette knife and gently glide it across the mountain. And you don't want to overdo it with the paint and the palette knife. You do not want to go over the entire mountain with this color mixture because we want to leave some of the dark color along with the lighter gray to add some realism. Okay, so go ahead and rinse off your palette knife and dry it off. And set your palette knife aside because we're not going to need it for the next step. Alright, so we let our mountain dry. So now we're going to work on our trees. And this time you're going to need your Filbert brush. And we're going to create shadows. So you're going to mix olive green, cadmium red, raw umber, and phthalo blue. Alright, so we're going to do our first row of trees and you're going to simply tap onto your canvas. The brush strokes from the Filbert brush is going to give the appearance like the crown of a tree. I like adding shadow to my paintings, especially if I'm doing like landscape, because realistically, if you're outside, if you're walking in the woods, or if you're on the beach, there's shadows. There are shadows everywhere. Because without shadows in your painting, the object would just look flat. But shadows will bring some realism to your painting. And try not to go to the brown line because we're going to add a second row of trees underneath the shadows. All right, so we're going to add our second row of trees once we're done with the first row. All right, go ahead, rinse off your brush and dry it off. Okay, so now we're going to work on the second row of trees. You still need your Filbert brush, and we're going to work on our shadows. The colors you will need are olive green, phthalo blue, and cadmium red. All right, so you're going to use the same technique as before. You're simply going to pat onto your canvas. And you notice that this shadow is lighter than the one we did for the first row of trees, because in the reference picture, to me, it seems like the first row of trees are a little darker than the second row that's coming up towards the front. And you just continue patting and adding your shadows until the whole second row is complete. All right, and those are our shadows. So now we're going to build on our layers for the trees. So for the shadow, we're going to add another layer, not of the shadow rather, but like for the first row of trees, we're going to use olive green and raw umber. For the second row, it's just going to be olive green straight from the tube. The reason why, going back to the reference picture, to me the first row looks a little darker. So I don't want the first row to be too light. So that's why I'm adding raw umber to give the green a little bit of darkness. And of course, as you come up, the second row looks lighter, and that's why I'm just going to add olive green straight from the tube. So if you haven't already, you can add those colors to your palette. And right now I'm going to mix olive green and raw umber. And you still need your Filbert brush for this step. So you see how there's a difference between the two colors. The shadow in the first row is darker than the second row. Because in the reference picture, that's how it looks to me. The first row is darker than the second row. So I'm going to mix up my colors. Olive green and raw umber, and you're using the same technique, just patting on your canvas. All right, and here we go. You just simply pat. You notice how it's still green, but it's a different type of green. And that's the effect I want. Alright, that's our first row, and rinse off your brush. And we're going to work on the second row. The second row is just olive green straight from the tube. And I promise you, eventually we'll get back to the mountains, but right now we're trying to fill in the empty space on our canvas. And just simply pat the olive green onto the second row. And at this point, it's okay to kind of go up into the first row a little bit with your paintbrush. Okay, so rinse off your brush. I still have paint in my brush, so I'm still trying to rinse it off. Personally, I don't like leaving paint, especially acrylic paint, in the brush because it could stain it. Alright, so I rinsed off my brush. That looks good. So we're going to go visit the mountains once again. This time we're going to add a lighter layer of gray. We don't want to do or add titanium white just yet. We still want to work on our grays and kind of just build on that. So you're going to mix permanent black and titanium white to make your gray. And then you're only going to add just a smidge of gray to titanium white. And when you're done mixing the black and white to make gray, make sure you rinse off your brush again before you add the tiny bit of gray to the titanium white. I'm just going to add a little bit more titanium white. Alright, rinse off your brush and you're going to grab the palette knife and you're going to use the same technique we did earlier. Just simply scoop a little bit on your knife and gently glide it across your canvas. And be sure you don't have too much paint on your palette knife. And it's probably hard to tell from this angle, but I can already see the texture and feel the texture on the mountain from the other layers we've done. And once again, do not cover the whole mountain with this gray. We want to have some form of realism to this painting. And also we want to have like variations of gray on our mountain. Alright, so rinse off your palette knife and dry it off. And so far this looks good. So the next step, we're going to work on our trees that are in the foreground. You're simply going to mix raw umber and titanium white. And to paint your trees, it does not matter if you have a flat brush or a filbert brush. So I have raw umber and I'm going to grab some titanium white, mix it in. Alright, so you're just simply going to paint straight lines for your trees, and you're going to paint them going across. And if you can, try to add variation to your trees, like maybe one is taller than the next, one is shorter than the next tree. It all doesn't have to be the same height. And I'm heavy-handed, so I accidentally added too much paint to the first tree, but it's okay. Okay, so we have our trees, so rinse off your brush. If you're happy with the way it looked, but actually I'm going to go in with a second layer to my trees because some of them look a little too thin, so I'm going to go over it with a second layer. And I want to show you at the top with our first two row of trees, the type of brush strokes that we use. The trees are really starting to take shape. Okay, so I am satisfied with my trees, and I'm just checking to see if my mountains are dry, and they are. But before we get to the mountains, I want to add another layer to the first two row of trees in the background. And so if you have not already, go ahead and rinse your brushes, and at this point it would be a good idea to also change your water. And once again, for the first row, we're going to use olive green and raw umber. I just realized that I'm using a flat brush when I should be using a filbert brush. So I'm rinsing off the flat brush. I got my filbert brush because we want to use the same brush strokes we did earlier. And you'll simply just start patting on your canvas. And it's okay to go up just a little into the mountain, but not too high. just going to keep going until I'm satisfied with the way it looks. I just realized that I've run out of the color that I'm using, so I'm grabbing more raw umber, and I think I need some more olive green as well, so I can finish up the first row of trees. Or actually, I think I have enough of olive green. Let me go ahead and mix this in with the raw umber. Alright, so that's it for the first row. So rinse off your brush and dry it off. We're going to now work on the second row, which is simply olive green. And you can let your paintbrush go up into the first row. Okay, so all of that looks good. So now that everything is dry, we are going to go to the mountains again, but this time we're just going to use titanium white. So go ahead and get out your palette knife, and you're going to gently just glide it across the mountains. We're almost to the finish line, folks. We're almost done. When it comes to painting, it takes patience and it does take time. And if you're a perfectionist like me, then yeah, it's going to take some time. Also, at this point, you could really feel the texture of your mountains. Alright, and I am done. So rinse off your palette knife, dry it off. I am pleased with how it looked. Alright, and now you're going to grab your flat brush and you're going to add snow caps to the top of your mountains. You're just going to simply use titanium white. Alright, so go ahead and give your brush a rinse. Alright, so now that our mountains are done, now we're going to work on our trees that are in the foreground. So I'm going to add yellow deep to my palette. And for our trees, we're going to start off with shadows, and then once we get our shadows, then we'll build on that with more colors. So for the shadows, you're going to need olive green, yellow deep, cadmium red, and phthalo blue. Alright, so I'm grabbing some yellow deep and mix it in with olive green. I'm going to grab a little bit of cadmium red. Make sure that's mixed well. And sorry, I'm stabbing the phthalo blue. It dried up on me, but I'm adding phthalo blue. And we're going to use the same method that we did with the first two rows of trees. We're just going to simply tap on the colors. And since these trees are in the foreground, it's okay to go up a little with your paint into the second row of trees, because technically that row is in the background. And as you can see, the painting is finally starting to make sense. It's finally coming together. And you're going to start going lower with your shadows because we want to fill in all the white space. Alright, so I need to refill my colors on the palette. I'm making sure the colors are mixed in well. Okay, so I finally got it. So I'm just going back in with my shadows. And like I said earlier, this time I'm making sure to fill in the white spaces. And I'm noticing the paint is going onto the trees that we just painted, which is okay, because later we're going to like clean up our trees. We're just going to use more raw umber and white to redo our trees. Okay, I'm rinsing off my brush. Now I want to use the same Filbert brush, and now that we have our shadows, now I want to go in with just simply olive green and yellow deep. And once again, use the same technique. Just simply tap or pat the colors onto your canvas. And as you're adding on this color mixture, try not to go to the bottom where the shadows are, because those shadows give the appearance that there are more trees behind the trees that you're working on right now. So we don't want to bother the shadows. We just want to focus towards the top. Alright, so I've rinsed off my brush. And once again, I'm refilling my palette. I am refilling it with raw umber because we're going to go touch up the trees, and more titanium white. Alright, I'm going in with the raw umber and titanium white. I'm going to touch up the trees. And guys, I'm sorry that my head is in the way. Alright, so that was good. So I'm rinsing off my brush. Okay, now, so we're not quite done with the painting yet. I've allowed our trees to dry, and now I'm going back in with the same mixture of olive green and yellow deep to add another layer. I decided to go down a little into the shadows, so just to give some variation, but still you don't want to overdo it and add too much. But now I have my tiny Filbert brush, and I'm just going to touch up the white spaces that are around the trees. And I've noticed some of the green or the shadows have spilled over into the grass, but we'll fix that as well. Okay, I'm happy with how my grass looks so far, so go ahead and rinse off your brush. And now we're going to move on and to the grass part. So you're going to need yellow ochre and raw sienna. And you're going to use the tiny filbert brush. And go ahead and mix your colors together, yellow ochre and raw sienna. And we're going to use the same technique as before, just short, quick brush strokes for the grass. And this time I'm focusing more at the top to cover up the green. And try not to use too much paint. You just want to lightly and quickly add in your grass. Okay, so I'm satisfied with that, so I rinsed off my brush. And now we're going to let that dry. And now that it is dry, we're going to use burnt sienna, because in the reference picture it seems like there's like small patches of dark colored grass, but we're just going to use raw sienna and our tiny filbert brush, and we're just going to add a few patches into the grass. Again, just quick brush strokes. And I'm just adding them sporadically. Okay, so I'm rinsing off my brush. And now at this point I'm just touching up, so I'm just adding more olive green and yellow deep mixture to my trees. If you're satisfied with how yours look, that's completely fine, but I'm just going in with another layer. Okay, I'm rinsing off my brush. And at this point, you can check your artwork to see if there's anything that you need to fix, if something looks a little off. You can go ahead, this is what I call the touch-up part. And so looking at my picture, I've decided to add yellow highlights because when I look at the reference picture, it seems like there's some yellow in the trees. So I'm going to use a Filbert brush and yellow deep acrylic paint from the tube. So I'm rinsing off my brush. And now I'm going to go in with yellow deep and just lightly tap the color. You want to use light taps onto your canvas. Okay, so I'm happy with how that looks. So I've rinsed off my brush and I see that somehow some gray color got into the sky. So I'm mixing in the blue mixture, which is Cerulean Blue, Phthalo Blue, and Titanium White. I'm going to go in with my tiny Filbert brush and just do my touch-up. Okay, so I'm looking at my picture again and I am satisfied with how it turned out. So there we have it.
I am so happy that you guys joined me today. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And you can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And so until next time, take care. Bye-bye.